Tim Pallas was Labor's Minister for Roads from 2006. He joined me in the studio. Tim Pallas, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Josie.
Why did it take so long for safety barriers to go up on the West Gate?
Well, I think if you look at the coroner's findings in 2004, he made two relevant observations. The first one was there was clear evidence that if you placed barriers on structures, then there was a direct correlation between the reduction in suicides at that location. The second finding that he made was that it may lead to overall reduction in suicides. So government in 2006, in March 2006, produced a report from Hydra Consulting who effectively said that they believed that there was no likelihood that there would be that the displacement of suicide would not necessarily lead to an overall reduction. As Minister, when I received this advice, I was sworn in December, and in July 2007 I rejected that advice, and I indicated to Vic Roads that I wanted them to proceed to incorporate into the work that was going on in the M1 project, the upgrade of the West Gate Bridge, to ensure that there were suicide barriers incorporated on the bridge.
So let's go back to the coroner's finding in 2004. There was a recommendation then that safety barriers be erected on the West Gate. Why did it take 3 years for the government to act? Well,
I think it came down to this basic proposition that there was advice before government that essentially they took the view that if you produced a barrier on one particular structure, you didn't necessarily take away the risk to the community of suicide.
Do you now see that advice was wrong? As we've heard that a coroner, since the barriers were erected, there's been a reduction of 85% of suicides on the West Gate, and that in fact there is no evidence that people have moved to another location.
Well, I'm gratified by it because essentially the decision that I made in July 2007 has been vindicated. Now, I will say, Josie, that there was a time lag between the decision in July 2007 and when ultimately the barriers were put in place. And in fact, because of some very unfortunate events in 2008, the government brought forward its plans and we put temporary barriers in place. The aim was always to have permanent barriers in place at the time of the conclusion of the West Gate Bridge works, which would have meant not until about 2010, 2011.
In 2005, then your predecessor, then Transport Minister Peter Batchelor, wrote to the Police Association saying there was no intention for barriers to be put up on the West Gate. In hindsight, was that a mistake?
Look, I think Peter at the time was struggling with an issue that the advice that I received in 2007 was that there were about 8 suicides a year off the West Gate Bridge. And in fact, by 2008 rather, there were 3 a month occurring. So the number had grown quite dramatically.
In hindsight, why wasn't it considered an urgent priority if that many people, 8 a year, were taking their lives from a specific site?
Well, I think the practical problems associated with putting the barriers in place...
What practical? Money?
No. Well, money's always a consideration, but in this context it wasn't, in the sense that I made a decision in July 2007 when I had no budget cover to deliver the suicide barriers. So I had to find that money somehow, and I did. The practical consideration was if we were going to put immediately, while we were re-strengthening the West Gate Bridge, that is taking out some of the supports in the bridge internally and then putting them back in, and we were going to add all the weight of temporary barriers, which included tons, literally thousands of tonnes of concrete being added onto the bridge while we were doing this delicate engineering work. Structurally, we had to be convinced that it would work. And I might say, we have to look back on our own performance in government. If I'd have had the vision of hindsight, I would have put, I think, those temporary structures in place earlier.
Tim Pallas, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Josie.
And anyone needing help, please contact Suicide Line on 1300 651 251.